Great, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for your time here. It's a pleasure to talk with everyone here, specific around what we're doing here to help organizations such as yourself from a security and compliance leveraging the AWS cloud. So once again, look forward, and once again, great presentations from my colleagues, and really going to talk about what we provide to help you to deploy those workloads and those environments that we've just talked about, for example, in Doug's presentations and others, but you have those compliance and security aspects that you need to deal with. We're going to talk a little bit about that here today, how we can help with some of those compliance pieces, services, as well as some of the regions that we have available and assets for you. So if we can go to the next slide, that'd be great. So specifically, let's talk and let's start what we're seeing from industry. What are organizations like yourselves telling us that they're seeing, and what are those trends we're observing in aerospace and defense? So first and foremost, there's a number of recent cybersecurity events that we're hearing across the world in the news that are bringing cybersecurity more into focus. It's increasing awareness on cybersecurity, increasing the number of requirements that we're seeing. So for example, with SolarWinds cyber attacks and Colonial Pipeline, we're seeing that drawing that attention. Next, from a US government perspective, we're seeing an increase in cybersecurity requirements being passed down, not just for themselves and their environments, but also to those organizations like yourselves in certain cases that are on this call that are supporting the US government in a certain capacity. So we're seeing, for example, in looking at the DoD, so DFARS, Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, they've augmented that just recently to include for organizations that they have to demonstrate how they are doing a self-assessment, and provided guidance on how to do a self-assessment to demonstrate that you are actually addressing those requirements. Before it was more of a self-attestation. And then fast forward even more, they've also introduced this new requirement around CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Framework from the DoD. So once again, we're seeing that increase in the industry as well, from government and internally. Next, the other part we're also observing is organizations are trying to take their environments and their legacy applications that they have in certain cases on-prem, and trying to take those and to achieve the compliance standards. And that's proving to be costly as well as heavy from a level of effort and perspective. So we're seeing that in organizations are trying to find ways, how do we do this without, for lack of a better word, breaking the bank and having this mountain of effort to be able to address those new compliance programs that are coming out. And the other part, a lot of organizations like, this all sounds great, what you're doing, what you have available from a security perspective, and what's out there, where they're hearing from a whole host of other organizations and our partners. But government organizations are trying to understand rather, how do I deploy this? They're looking for prescriptive guidance on how to deploy these environments and what are those best practices. And last but not least, of course, what we're seeing from aerospace and defense is organizations are looking to the cloud as a mechanism for them to accelerate their deployment, as well as to achieve some of the compliance pieces. For example, with CMMC defining what that boundary is, it's a little bit easier to deploy from that perspective. So those are just some of the examples that we're seeing from industry. If we can go to the next slide, please. So at AWS, security is job one. Right? You'll hear that from everybody here in AWS, and also hear from my colleagues. So AWS is specifically designed to help you to build secure, resilient, high-performing, and efficient infrastructure in support of your workloads and what you need to do to support your business. We allow you to automate some of those manual tasks that you're having to deal on a day-to-day basis. And this way you can shift your efforts to focusing on really what's important to your business, and also to innovate. So some of the areas that we're providing from a security perspective is allowed for the inheritance of global security and compliance controls that we talked about here, providing that visibility and control for those environments you deployed, highest standards that we are complying with within our environment to help you, our customers in aerospace and defense and other industries at large. We're also providing some of these services that are integrated that help you to reduce that risk that you have, because also it's allowing you to reduce some of those errors that you're seeing potentially from human-based manual processes. And then last but not least, we have a large ecosystem of partners that provide solutions to help you use the organizations that are here on the call today. If we can go to the next slide, please. So let's talk first about inheriting global security and compliance controls. I know for a number of the folks here on the call, this is extremely important, whether you're a government organization or you're an A&D organization that's supporting those customers or have commercial entities. These are requirements that you have to address with your business and have to deal with day to day. And once again, protecting the IP for your organization. So really, to aid with those compliance efforts, AWS as an organization, we regularly achieve these third-party validations for thousands of controls. And these global compliance programs are going to help you to meet those requirements and reduce that amount of lift. What you see here on the screen today is that it was merely a subset of those programs that we work with. And we have both validation and authorizations. Everything from FedRAMP to the Department of Defense Cloud Computing Security Requirements Guide to FIPS compliance. All these are there to help you as an organization, the things that we work with to make sure we're reducing that lift, but also reducing the risk for you. Our compliance programs, in many cases, are defined, and we provide that information on how you can leverage some of those compliance programs and reuse some of those assets, even prescriptive guidance on how to leverage our solutions, and pre-package what we call in certain cases quick starter implementations to help you with that process and reduce that amount of lift and provide that prescriptive guidance. If you remember in the beginning, a lot of organizations are looking for, what's that prescriptive guidance? What is that best practice that I can leverage? So for example, if I take FedRAMP, we have from a FedRAMP perspective, we have the FedRAMP customer package that customers can download. Provides information on the coverage from a program perspective, from the different controls, all those pieces. I'll take an example of some of the customers that my colleagues have mentioned. When they're having to demonstrate compliance with DFARS that I mentioned before, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement 252-204-7012, which is safeguarding covered defense information, one of the requirements mentions that organizations, if they're using the cloud, have to demonstrate that they are authorized at the FedRAMP moderate or equivalent level. We have that information, so this way you as a customer can demonstrate your compliance with that and reducing your level of effort to demonstrate compliance. We also have industry software vendors, independent software vendors, like SaaS organizations that are supporting you. So rather than going through and getting their certification from scratch for their organizations, what are they doing? They're leveraging AWS. They're leveraging our compliance and our compliance programs to be able to reduce that lift, and they can demonstrate, I'm using AWS, and here's how I meet specifically that control. So just examples of how we're helping industry and organizations when it comes to addressing some of these strict compliance regulations. The AWS compliance page provides tremendous detail on every one of these global programs and regional programs. So I recommend you look at that page when you're trying to understand a little bit more, for example, about FedRAMP or DoD SRG or other programs, even CMMC, which we'll talk a little bit more about here in the rest of this program. If we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the integrated services that we provide. So as you can see here on the slide, we have a number of different services that we provide to you, our customers, to help you to deploy your secure environments. So for example, they're broken down in different categories for identity and access management all the way through to compliance. So what we're doing here is helping you to automate some of those tasks that you have that would normally be, in certain cases, human and potentially error prone. This way you can focus your efforts on working on some of those other areas that can help to provide value to your organization. So you can also select from a different set of these solutions and combine them together to address some of your needs that you have. So for example, taking services such as AWS organizations and taking that into consideration in conjunction with, for example, how we leverage some of our other services. I talked about the AWS FedRAMP partner package earlier. So all the way on the right-hand side, you'll say AWS Artifact, and that's a mechanism where you could download some of our documentation to demonstrate those pieces. So all these services provide value to you and can be combined in certain ways to address your specific compliance needs and the needs of your organization as well. Let's go to the next slide. So we've talked a little bit about compliance programs. We've talked a little bit about services. Now let's talk about those regions that we have available from an AWS perspective to help deploy those interesting workloads that my colleagues have just mentioned. Everything from the Lockheed Martins of the world and others. These are those regions that we provide that are available to you. So let's go from left to right. So if we look first, we have the AWS Cloud, our standard regions. And those regions have their levels of compliance that they've worked through. So for example, FedRAMP, they are authorized up to FedRAMP moderate. They also DoD SRG Impact Level 2. And many of our organizations and our customers leverage the AWS Standard Cloud, depending on what their requirements are. Then we move over to the right to the AWS GovCloud. So this region was purposely built for organizations like yourselves who have strict compliance requirements. They've come to us and said, yeah, the commercial cloud's great. We love the value proposition, but we have these strict compliance requirements we have to deal with. And we're looking for that, and we're looking for that environment to help us in those areas, whether it be FedRAMP, DoD SRG, FIPS, criminal justice information, and that's why we deployed GovCloud. The other big area that you've seen a number of the customers and a lot of organizations that are on this call is having to address compliance with ITAR. GovCloud region was purpose-built for that, and we'll talk a little bit more about the GovCloud region as we go onto the next slides. But if we move over to the right, you'll see we also deployed our AWS secret region, and that secret region is for those customers that have that next level of compliance requirement, having to deal with secret programs. And then ultimately, of course, to the far right is our top secret regions, working with the intelligence community. These are sponsored by the intelligence community. Our AWS secret region also has programs available for customers like you to be able to leverage our secret regions in support of those workloads. And each one of these regions can be used to deploy those mission and program critical workloads, such as product lifecycle management that we talked about in previous sessions, ERP, high performance computing, as my colleagues talked about. That's where these regions are available to help you there. So with that, let's quickly go to the next slide. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more here. We're going to focus more into the GovCloud region. So the GovCloud region, as I mentioned earlier, it was purpose-built specifically for these strict compliance requirements. It's an isolated region, so it is not housed inside our existing data centers that were for our commercial regions. These are isolated both physically and logically, these regions, specifically because we're addressing some of the compliance requirements that we've talked about earlier. It was purpose-built, for example, for ITAR. I'll talk a little bit more about what that means and how we're supporting the ITAR requirements. Also for these organizations who have their mission and program critical workloads and how we address some of those pieces. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. And we also have tools in place to help you deploy those workloads, whether it be HPC, PLM, ERP that we mentioned before, or even IoT that Doug was talking about earlier. So we also have those tools to help you deploy in those regions. You can see over to the left, we have two regions. There's a West region and an East region. Each one of those regions have what's referred to as availability zones. We have 3 availability zones, and each one of those availability zones are then tied to one-to-many data centers. So very much provides that infrastructure that you need to be able to run those mission-critical workloads and have that high availability that you're looking for and resilience and disaster recovery. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So what are some of those distinguishing features about the GovCloud region? So we'll start here on this chart around, let's call it the 1 o'clock area here. So we have 2 physically and logically isolated regions that I mentioned. So we're not sharing data center with other regions. These are specifically regions and data centers and infrastructure that's dedicated to the GovCloud region. Moving to the 3 o'clock position, you'll see that it has separate identity and access manager credentials. So whereas on the commercial cloud for AWS, our standard cloud regions, you'll have your credentials that you have to access that region. We give you a separate set of credentials for GovCloud. Once again, because of the physical separation, the logical separation, and some of the compliance programs we're working with. Moving to the 5 o'clock position on the slide, it has therefore a dedicated AWS management console. What does that mean? So within AWS, you have a console that you use to spin up your workloads, your services, whether that be storage, network, or compute services. That's that graphical user interface to be able to deploy those. So you have a separate environment specifically for GovCloud. It looks exactly the same, by the way, as what we do in our commercial regions. But once again, dealing with that physical and logical separation, we make sure that when you're spinning up services in that region, you don't have visibility to the commercial regions, nor do the commercial regions have visibility to GovCloud, once again. There are also some prerequisites to have access to the GovCloud region too. So next, we're moving over to, let's call it the 7 o'clock position. So the AWS GovCloud region, we were talking about ITAR earlier. The AWS GovCloud region is managed by US citizens only on US soil. So everybody that supports the GovCloud region, and that helps address the requirements from an ITAR perspective, as well as export controls. Next, moving to the 9 o'clock position, we have also FIPS 140-2 validated endpoints, which is very important for a number of these compliance programs that you have to deal with and demonstrate compliance with as an organization in the aerospace and defense world. And last but not least, probably about the, let's call it the 11 o'clock position, we refer to as a community cloud with vetted accounts. So to request access to the GovCloud region, organizations have to demonstrate that they meet certain requirements for access to the cloud. One is the root account holder must be a US person. US person is either a US citizen or a green card holder as defined by the State Department. The organization must be incorporated to do business on US soil. And last but not least, the organization and the individual must not be barred from handling export control data. So not just anyone can get access to the GovCloud region. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit more about the compliance programs. As I mentioned, the GovCloud region was really created with respect to compliance in the cloud. So we talked a little bit about ITAR. So from a region perspective, it was purpose built for that. That's what we have there from an AWS perspective. Everyone who supports the region is a US citizen on US soil, and other controls we have in place to support that piece, as well as also services in place to support that, such as encryption data at rest and data in transit. Moving over, we'll talk about FedRAMP a little bit. So FedRAMP is also an important topic for this crowd. So as I mentioned, DFARS and other requirements that are out there, we look specifically from a FedRAMP perspective and require FedRAMP moderate, or in certain cases, your customers, if you're working with the DoD or other federal civilian customers, may require to have a FedRAMP high perspective. So we provide at the GovCloud level FedRAMP high, so we exceed a lot of times those requirements that you see. Moving to the Department of Defense, so you'll see the third one on the top row. So from a DoD Cloud Computing Security Requirements Guide, we are authorized in the GovCloud region at Impact Level 4 and Impact Level 5. And once again, you can leverage some of that information when you're deploying your own workloads, specifically in that environment. We also help facilitate for you to deploying and meeting that compliance. And we also have programs, by the way, to help you secure your FedRAMP authorization if you're an ISV, as an example, or if you're deploying a workload that needs to be DoD SRG compliant, we also have programs to help you secure that ATO. Moving now again to DFARS, another important topic for this organization. We provide services as well as solutions and assets to help you and facilitate your DFARS compliance, whether that's DFARS 252, 204, 7012 with safeguarding covered defense information, or some of the new requirements, the 7019 clause, the 7020 clause, and of course now the 7021 clause, which refers to CMMC. So that takes us now to the last icon there on our top row, which is CMMC. So we're developing solutions to help our customers accelerate their CMMC compliance and also be compliant with the DFARS requirements. And you can see on the bottom row, we have other compliance programs that are important to this crowd, of course, such as FIPS compliance, NIST 800-53, that maps quite a bit to, of course, the FedRAMP requirements, and NIST Special Publication 800-171, which is what is called out specifically in the DFARS requirements that I've mentioned. We also provide information and guidance and assets to help you understand what can you inherit from AWS in support of those compliance programs. So from a NIST 800-171, what can I inherit from AWS? What is my responsibility as an organization? What is a shared responsibility between AWS and the customer? And what is all 100% of the customer's responsibility? We provide that information, additional guidance as you go to the compliance programs that I was mentioning. Let's go to the next slide. So the aerospace and defense organizations, especially your organizations that are supporting the Department of Defense, I mentioned early on that the DoD and government in certain cases is deploying, or rather placing greater compliance requirements out there for organizations. So recently, the Department of Defense, last year about this time, released the CMMC version 1.02 requirements. And essentially, this is a requirement for organizations to demonstrate compliance based on different levels 1 through 5. Based on what that requirement defines, organizations will have to demonstrate that they are compliant. So you will need to go through an assessment, and you will need to get certified. And that certification lasts for 3 years, and you'll work with an assessor. So it's a pretty complicated program. Guidance is still coming out, and it's emerging. So right now, guidance is out there for levels 3, and we're looking for level 4 and level 5 guidance to come out of the DoD. But once again, it's going to be important for organizations like yourself. So AWS is an organization who our strategy is to provide solutions to help you customers accelerate your CMMC compliance by reducing the level of effort and risk that you have to endure as you're going through this process. What does that translate to? And we've had a few solutions we've deployed already that we'll talk about a little bit here today with the little bit of time that I have left. So first is the AWS compliant framework for federal and DoD workloads. The second is a customer responsibility matrix that we're deploying that will be available soon. And next is the AWS compliance page. If we can go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit more in detail on each one of these solutions. So let's talk first about the compliant framework. So the compliant framework, think of it as a general foundation. So essentially what we've done is we've created the solution to help organizations by providing prescriptive guidance, prepackaged solutions, reference architectures to provide this general support system. And essentially this general support system, it's a landing zone concept and ability to vend accounts, which means being able to create new accounts and inherit those security guardrails that you've defined for your organization. So we're really reducing that amount of lift for an organization like yourself to have to go through and figure out, okay, how am I going to architect this? And how am I going to define where my boundary is going to be? And how do I define how I'm going to address some of these controls? How do I make sure those security controls and guardrails I'm placing are applied to every one of these maybe accounts that I'm creating to support HPC, PLM, ERP, models-based systems engineering, and the list goes on and on. So it's a mechanism to automate some of that process. It's an infrastructure as code solution. We released this back in December. And once again, it's available to organizations, both large and small, as they look into deploy their environments. Provides an implementation guide you can see on the left-hand side and other components. The benefits to you, and once again, it reduces that amount of effort on your side to be able to define and architect that environment, and also help you understand, okay, how am I going to demonstrate my compliance when I'm working on developing my artifacts in support of that, such as my system security plan and other assets. We provide information to help you with that. Let's go to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit some more solutions we have here from a CMMC perspective. The next part I want to talk about is our customer responsibility matrix for CMMC. So one thing is the architecting and deploying your environment. The next piece is now I have to work on my documentation and to be able to support that for my assessments that I'm gonna have to do with a C3PAO. That's a CMMC third-party assessor organization. They're going to come in, they're the ones who are going to look control by control. I am looking for CMMC level 3, and how do you address this specific control? So what we're doing from an AWS perspective is we have what's called a customer responsibility matrix. It's already available for FedRAMP, by the way. So we created a new version specifically for CMMC that goes CMMC practice by practice, initially for level 3, because that's the only level that you can be certified, but that will be expanded to address levels 4 and level 5. But in that responsibility matrix, it clearly defines what's the inheritance available from AWS, what's your responsibility, what's AWS's responsibility and what you can inherit, and what's your shared responsibility that jointly address that practice. Also, the responsibility is specific, not just saying, oh, this is what you can inherit and you can't inherit and what's your responsibility, but also information on what that responsibility looks like from an AWS perspective, as well as a customer's perspective. Third, we'll provide also additional guidance, additional commentary from AWS on that. Leverage a lot what we're doing, for example, from a CMMC, from a FedRAMP perspective, or DoD SRG. And it also has a level mapping, so it also demonstrates for this specific practice, it's also mapped to this specific level of CMMC. As I mentioned, this will be available soon. We're in those reviews of that documentation, and look for that to be available, and that will be on our CMMC compliance page, as well as other blogs and other documentation we'll have out there. But essentially, this is going to help customers to plan, architect, and deploy these compliant environments. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So I talked about where this would be available in information, so that takes me now to the CMMC compliance page. If you remember early on, we were talking about the different compliance programs that are available out there. So CMMC, we've created a page for customers to be able to have a better understanding of the CMMC compliance program, as well as what is AWS providing customers to help them in support of securing your CMMC authorization, answering questions that you may have out there, and also other documentation, other tips and techniques, for example, blogs. So it's really a page to give you that visibility to that information. So as I mentioned, first, it gives you information about the CMMC framework, question you may have about the framework. You know, we regularly consult with the DoD CMMC program office, as well as the CMMC accreditation body as well, for information with respect to the program, changes to the program. As we know, there's still a lot of coming out from CMMC, and a lot that we're looking for, but we work with them to understand those pieces and how we can develop other solutions. That gets me to that second bullet here that we have is AWS CMMC solutions. So the solution that I just mentioned, for example, provides information and links to that solution itself. The customer responsibility matrix, once that's released, you'll have information on that here and how to access that information, and other programs that are available to help you with compliance, everything from working with our partners to address your CMMC compliance programs that you need, blogs as well. So we're providing a number of blogs out there. We just recently released one to help you go through that process and understand that journey and how AWS can help you when you're looking to secure your CMMC authorization. With that, let's go to the next slide. Great. So I went through a lot of information here. This is, once again, we only can fit so much in a half-hour presentation, but here is also, since we're providing you these slides, is links to other information, more detailed information for the areas that I've covered today. So for example, if you understand more about our cloud security, there's a link to our cloud security page. The compliance programs, very important, whether it be CMMC, ITAR, FedRAMP, all those different programs. The GovCloud region. So the GovCloud region, I have here a couple of links to the GovCloud, the overview page if you want to learn more about GovCloud, but also the user guide. The great thing about AWS is we provide all this information out there. So if you want to understand more about GovCloud, about more how a service is deployed in the region, how to architect some of the solutions, the user guide will have that link there. Services that are available in region, also there as well, to help you as you start defining, okay, what services are available that I can use for deploying my workloads. How do I request access to GovCloud? That's a number of different questions that we see from customers, just to make it easier. We'll have that link there. And I've talked about CMMC compliance. That CMMC compliance page is here as well. So once again, mechanism to share information with the organization. I know we only had a brief amount of time here together, but I wanted to provide information where you can then find some additional information, or of course, ask more questions of us. So with that, I'll look to Tim. Do we have time for a few questions?
We probably have time for one question. I don't see any in the chat right now, but we'll pivot to the connected aircraft team here in a minute if we don't get any. But obviously, this is a huge issue of around security and around compliance for everyone in the industry. And I know we spent a lot of time talking about CMMC and some of the U.S. government compliance concerns, but Ulysses, do you want to talk just briefly about our approach to compliance issues outside of the United States, maybe in Europe in particular?
Yeah, so within Europe, that's what we're working from a CMMC perspective to help organizations to comply with from a CMMC perspective to leverage our regions that are available internationally. So we're working developing solutions for those pieces. And we also, if you remember from the compliance page that I provided earlier, we also have all the different programs that we see internationally that organizations have to deal with and have to comply with, everything from Australia to the UK and other areas. So we provide information on how you can leverage our security, compliance, and authorizations and validations that we have from those programs as you're deploying your workloads in those regions. So all that information is available there. And then we, of course, also feel free, we work closely with our customers, reach out to your account teams, reach out to this team to help you as we map out some of those process, whether you're dealing with data sovereignty or other areas. So.
Great. Okay, thanks. And again, as this is sort of an evolving, always evolving topic on compliance. So, as new regulations come out, as new government policies come out, we'll make sure to update this group either through some of our blog posts or the compliance website, as Ulysses said.